It was really an odd. Last time we met, I think I told you that night I found out that my sister was going to need to have a double mastectomy. And then tonight, as I was driving over to Mount Vernon from my home in Anacortes, there was this incredible rainbow in the valley, because sort of the lid of the sky, the clouds had sort of opened up a little bit out there over the water, and the sun was shining through. And then as I was driving, of course the rainbow moves with you. Unfortunately, you never find that pot of gold there. But there actually were two rainbows nested. One really big one, very vibrant, and then one sort of thinner and more kind of wispy. And it was so incredibly beautiful. And then basically as I was watching that, my mother-in-law called and said that my father-in-law actually who's been in the hospital all week long, is kind of starting to fail a little bit. So it's interesting that on nights when we're going to talk about where is God when bad things happen, that things kind of happen. Which makes me wonder, maybe God's angry that we're talking about bad things that happen. So that's something worth pondering about. So, we'll see if God's angry after the presentation tonight. So let's all. Last week Julia did a wonderful job presenting an experience to us, and tonight we're going to have Herb, and it's a deep competition, Herb. So let's see if you can do better than Julia.
I've known Julia for some time. I know there's no chance that I'm going to do better than Julia, so I'm not going to even attempt that. But I'm going to tell you a story of an event in my life. It was fall of 1973. My wife was pregnant with our second child. Because the first child had been born cesarean, the second child would also be born cesarean. At least that's the way they did it at that time. And it was 2 days prior to the time they were going to induce her to go into labor and to then have the child via cesarean. I got a call at work, and the day before, as I say, she was calling to say that she had started into labor, her water had broken, and she was headed to the hospital. It was very fortunate that my family was there. My mother and father were there, and they were there primarily to take care of my younger daughter while this event was going to take place. And so my mother was able to rush her, get her to the hospital quickly, and I immediately got to the hospital, and we sat for a while, my mother and I, and then before too long the doctor came out and said, "You have a lovely girl," and so before too long we could go into the viewing room and look in, and here was this lovely, beautiful baby. And in looking at her, it was sort of odd in that she was breathing at about 3 times the rate of all the other babies in the room that you could see. And I thought, well, she's just freshly born, and maybe there's an issue there or something. And so we went. My wife came to her room about that time and went to talk with her a bit and see how she was doing. And about that time, the doctor came in and said, "Would you come here a minute, please? I need to talk to you." And it turns out that there had been some trauma in the birth, and as a result, the lungs weren't working very well. And so he informed me that they were going to rush this child to Children's Orthopedic. They would bring her in a couple of minutes so we could take a look at her, and then they were going to get her off to Children's Orthopedic. So about 5 minutes later, I'm in with my wife, and in comes a foil wrapped thing that could have been a ham, but it was my daughter. And they had wrapped her in aluminum foil, I presume to hold the temperature or something, but a presentation that was probably not appropriate given the circumstances. But anyway, she appeared in that way, and my wife got to take a quick look at her, and they very quickly rushed her off to Children's Orthopedic. I immediately checked to make sure my mom could stay with my wife for a little bit, and jumped in the car and headed to Children's Orthopedic also. I got to Children's Orthopedic Hospital and went upstairs, and they sat down, and the doctor came out and said, well, she's not getting very good oxygen diffusion in her lungs. She's in severe jeopardy at this point in time. She just sit here and sort of take care of things. and we'll let you know as things happen. And they immediately back into ICU. Now, as sort of a background piece, I was not involved in church at that point in time. I'd been involved in church as a young man. In the late 50s, I lived in the South, and there was the church I belonged to had decided not to allow a couple of black Nigerian seminarians to join the church. And that seemed pretty odd to me, that a church that had values about how we treat each other would do that, and as a result decided that Christianity probably didn't have anything, particularly for me as a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old, that's the only way I could reconcile that, and I left the church. And I left all of the language of the church behind me. So I had no language for God, I had no language for anything. I sort of looked at the world in a spiritual way, but not in a God way. With my daughter being in this shape and knowing that her life was in the balance, I needed something really badly. And the first thing that I wanted a God that I could bargain with. I wanted to make a deal. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Let me think about what that might be. Maybe I should eat carrots. I'll go to church. I'll do whatever. Just make my daughter okay. That's the first sort of feeling that I was working on and trying to figure out how to do that. The other thing was this intense loneliness. I was alone. It was me. There was no one there. I was in the hall. I had a daughter that was dying. And so I just wrestled with that for a long time, hour, 2 hours. They came out and said, you know, we've got her sort of stabilized momentarily. Would you like to see her? So I went into the ICU, and she's in the incubator, covered in tubes, and so on and so forth. I stayed there until about 1 in the morning. They said things are sort of stable at this point. So I went home to get some sleep, since I hadn't slept in a number of hours. Got a call about 2 hours later. She's starting to fade. She's not doing well at all. So I went back to bed, being just totally exhausted. A couple of hours later, called again. She's stabilized momentarily. She's not doing too badly at this point. And then about an hour later, the doctor called and said, we have a new modality, a new machine here we're going to try. We'll hope that this will do it. The thing you can't do with a newborn is you can't give them oxygen, because oxygen in newborns really is devastating to nerve tissue. And so they'll either be blind or have a significant nerve damage if you use pure oxygen. So what they ended up doing was putting a higher partial pressure. They just increased the pressure. They had an incubator that was at a higher pressure, and then she got more oxygen. I was terribly lonely through that. I wanted God to do something for me, but I didn't know who God was, and I didn't know anything about God, and I didn't know anything other than just being so lonely and so alone. Anyway, that's the story as it happened. The good side is my daughter did make it through it. She is a wonderful young woman in Maui now, married and doing well, and a delight. So.